Sorry, those of us in Europe have had at least 8 hours to be sarcastic together already.
No, that's okay. You're helping us all, like, catch up to you. I understand.
Yep, let's get started.
Yeah. We're at 5 minutes past.
Yeah, let's go.
Yep, perfect. And we've got slides, so here we are. Liz, do you want to be able to kick it off?
I will if it doesn't get too noisy, but I'll say hello, everyone. Welcome.
Sure.
I'm in Berlin, Velocity, and it's a little bit loud, but well, we'll see how it goes. Chris, do you have KubeCon and CloudNativeCon dates to remind people about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're just going to do SIG updates and the hardware graduation review today, but just friendly reminder that all of us are focused on KubeCon. It's going to be quite a large event. I think we're close to about 11,000 people registered with about 2 weeks to go. Just wanted to remind folks that please book hotels and everything. A lot of things are sold out. And also only about, I think 15 to 20% of our attendees so far have registered for a Colo event. So if something like EnvoyCon is in your interest or Contributor Summit, please register for those. And more importantly, if you log into Sketch, there's the ability to kind of like select which talks you're interested in attending. Please go ahead and do that because it's really hard to plan room sizes in advance based on interest. And we're going to try to use all that data from Sketch to do so. So any questions on KubeCon before we move on? I'll take that as a no, and we'll see everyone in San Diego.
Okay, then I might start on this SIG updates for SIG app delivery. So we had a bi-weekly meeting series where we kicked off most of our work. Right now, honestly, most of the work and most of the time was used for project presentations. We think that this was a lot of catch-up work because there were some of these project presentations scheduled for the TOC, which were then moved into SIG app delivery. So we had in there, obviously, Argo presenting the operator framework, which led to a lot of discussion. So there's like a longer discussion of those. As a side note, we also try to keep the discussions on the mailing list, but also started to have issues in the GitHub repository, so we kind of have them better archived. Then there was presentation on Captain on the message-driven control plane and Litmus for chaos engineering. Yes, Liz, we are in the same building right now. So we have a discussion how to proceed with these projects going forward. I think some of them lend themselves nicely with some of the work we're doing right now, which gets us to the second point, the model for application delivery, which has been around for a while. This is this document and where Harry specifically spent quite some work into like putting in together the different layers of what we look into, which will serve as a basis on how we put projects into the scope, what areas and what work they are related to. There's an example linked in here where Argo was doing this. Some of the other submissions were doing this pretty well already as well. And I think it's also will also be serving well as the building block for the landscape work that we should be doing to put projects into different areas. So everyone who's interested in the work and hasn't seen this model yet, please provide comments. Because going forward, we will use it as a basis of most of the work that's coming out of it. Next topic, and obviously, are the sessions for SIG app delivery. There will be two. There will be like a general introduction. Looking at the meeting participation right now, it's still a bit lower than, maybe not as expected, but lower than wanted to. We want to get more people involved. I believe the KubeCon session can help us there. And the second one will really be about the app delivery model and diving deeper in there. Operator and Operator Hub are combined proposals, yes, to Chris's question. And I think that's also a bigger discussion to have there because it's an open source project jointly with a bigger infrastructure project around the operator hub. And that I think is one that definitely needs deeper discussion, because also where the infrastructure should be hosted and these kind of things. And that's the next step that we should definitely take on that one. Have a bit more of a more detailed discussion on, yes, parallel to Helm charts in some way. So there we're also looking at obviously for guidance from the TUC, how we want to handle this going forward. Should this still be part of like one organization owning it? Would this then be something that the CNCF should be owning? I think that's the bigger discussion point, definitely around the operator framework and also operator hub. So we can facilitate a follow-up discussion with the team there. There have been some discussions, but no final conclusion reached yet. But I'd definitely like to learn more, and whoever can share it, how you exactly handle it for Helm would definitely be useful, because this is a proposal we can then get back to the folks around Operator Hub as well. That's it pretty much from the update for app delivery.
I guess I'm going to ask a question, probably a big question in a small sentence. What are the arguments against Operator Framework and Operator Hub joining the CNCF?
I think there are no real arguments against it really joining the CNCF. I think we should just be clear how we would transition all the artifacts and the infrastructure that comes with it, and that's just a discussion I think that should then be also have with the TUC per se.
Okay, so is that essentially a cost question, a kind of maintaining infrastructure question?
I think it's, and I don't want to speak like for everybody, but what we had so far in the conversation, I think it's a cost question on the one hand, it's a governance question. So who would like to be actively running Operator Hub? I think everything we can learn from Helm is definitely helpful to structure this going forward. But
I think the other thing that was discussed on the mailing list and wasn't really closed out was having Operator Hub really closely tied to the operator framework, given that there were other projects submitting that were also creating operators. That coupling, I think, is I guess slightly concerning. The question of, is Operator Hub for all operators, and are operators defined as per Kubernetes, or is Operator Hub just for operator framework operators?
No.
Also, do we have a definition for an operator, which is another whole other topic?
And I know from the team that the intent is to have it host all operators regardless of their creation, and that's already true today. Rook was not created with the operator framework, and it lives happily out there, as does Nuba, and I could probably name a couple others. So, I mean, there's already, operators that live there that don't use it. So the idea is any and all can exist. I mean, there's little things to get it into there, that are required, but it doesn't require the framework. So that's the first piece. And actually the team kind of lamented whether or not they even should include that with the proposal, because they were worried about that concern, actually, that people would think it's tightly coupled. It isn't. So Joe, to your point, I think we could work on what we feel like a definition of an operator is, if that would be helpful in terms of cloud native definitions.
Yeah, it actually might be something useful coming out of the app delivery SIG, since we are on SIG.
I'd take a note on one action item to really define what an operator is, and then get back to the team whether they want to split it up into two separate things, like one place to store them, what we define as operators, and the other one doing really the operator framework as one way to build it.
So one last comment there, and then I'll move on. And sorry, Matt, you can go first. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say there's some more complexity in here that I'm curious about, because under the operator framework, there's also the operator lifecycle manager, which is very much like a service catalog. In fact, it has things like controllers for chargeback. And the operator hub tends to support the operator lifecycle manager, which ties into the operator framework. And so how do all of those go together? And is the operator lifecycle manager coming in too? And what does that mean for other operators that don't work in that service catalog type model, that aren't for that functionality? I think that needs to be figured out as well, because the operator framework and the tooling and the hub around it have become fairly opinionated in one direction of operator. But if you go back to what Khoros defined quite a long time ago, it's a little bit different. And some of the people who were at Khoros at the time are working on some of these other tools and noting that in the conversations. And so I don't know, do we redefine operator? Do we go with the original definition? If we redefine it, who gets pulled in and how does this, there's a little bit of complexity that I would ask that get worked out and have some traceability to it. So that way it doesn't go in necessarily just one person's direction or one group's direction, because they were the ones pulled into the conversation at the time that it happened.
I have a definition in mind, and we can just go with mine. How's that sound? No, I'm kidding. The point I wanted to make is that the operator hub feels a little bit like the CNCF landscape also, in that it's just a sort of a map of the projects that are out there.
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it might be just a map. On the other hand, I think it's a trusted source also for people to go for operators. And it's a bigger decision. How much do we want to have something as a trusted source when it comes to, are these operators tested? Which versions they work with? How far do we want to go? So it might actually really make sense to split up the two independently, plus having obviously the discussion about how we define an operator, and agree on this definition and see which projects fit in there.
If there's a parallel to the landscape, that opens the question of how we and who determines what projects can and can't make it into that framework, or is it a free-for-all? I really don't know. Okay.
So it sounds like there's a lot of good questions here.
Yeah.
And we're not going to decide them all right now.
All right.
Is this something that just gets punted back to SIG app delivery to go try and give us a nice presentation on?
Yeah, so I took down the notes and we'll line it up with the folks. And I think it's our work to do, yeah.
I think this will benefit from a small group conversation at KubeCon actually.
Yeah, just one other comment that answering these kind of questions is kind of part of being in the sandbox, is to be able to, you know, find out all these questions and answer them properly. So maybe that's not a blocker to get into sandbox.
Yeah, I think SIG app delivery folks would be a good place to have this sort of discussion and help guide the conversation going forward. So thank you for that. All right, who's next?
That would be SIG storage. So we were looking at the Dragonfly project after the talk. Refer that to the SIG for a review between sandbox to incubation. We have had presentations from the project, but we haven't collated all of our feedback yet. So I apologize that this slipped, but we'll cover this off in our next session. In the meantime, we have a number of different groups that are leading different initiatives on content that we intend to have drafts or at least some good milestones ready for KubeCon. The first is an update to the storage landscape white paper to include a database section. We have the first draft out, and we've discussed some updates that are needed, and that's in progress of being updated. We're also looking to build a use case library to cover how different use cases can work with different storage options and how some of these can be implemented. And this use case library is going to be templatable and is going to be stored in GitHub. The idea being that we're going to be hoping that the community can contribute use cases and different options and build up a library of use cases which the community can use over time, and we'll have a process of sort of keeping it evergreen and sort of archiving off old use cases as time passes. We also have a group working on performance and benchmarking white paper. Some of the new members of the storage SIG I've got together here, and we're covering off some educational aspects to cover off the concepts of this and document some of the common pitfalls, and we're also documenting some guidance on how to use different tools for testing performance of volumes and databases. And again, we have a draft outline available, and we're hoping to have a working document for KubeCon on that. And then finally, Erin had put together.
Sorry, can you share this document with the other 6 as well? I think this is something that we are kind of like all eventually have to deal with. So it would be great if we can work on this jointly.
Sure. I can edit this and put the links in. But if you want to access it right now, the storage SIG minutes have all the links to the documents that are in progress.
And it is meant to be across all SIGs. We would love collaboration around it because it is not just for storage. It just happens to be where we created it. So by all means.
Indeed. Definitely. Yep, agreed. And finally, we have a document that Erin has put together, which I believe was discussed with the talk, and according to the agenda, is probably going to be discussed a little later on, but documenting the process for reviewing sandbox projects, which hopefully will give us a way to formalize that process going forward. So I think that's the update from SIG Storage. Happy to take any questions.
Point of order, we are actually postponing the sandbox documentation project to, frankly, a meeting where we have more space. So happy to take comments, happy to be able to put that on the agenda for next time.
I will make the comment that we did have a discussion, I mean, this is probably 3 weeks ago, I guess, with the TOC. I would encourage TOC members, if they haven't already, to put, and this includes me, to put comments into that sandbox document.
Yes, please. All right, we can move on to runtime.
Yeah, I think that's me. Basically, the charter has been essentially finalized. I think we've closed comments there. We had quite a bit of healthy discussion, and I think we resolved everything, as far as I'm aware, to everyone's satisfaction. What we would like, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, we were planning to have a vote on this and actually formally incorporate this in the next week or two before KubeCon.
You are correct. That is our plan.
And right now, I am the only one sort of actively involved as a co-chair here. I'm still soliciting helpers for co-chairs. So if you're interested and would like to contribute, your help would be most welcome. Rather than hold up the process until such time as we have that, I'm happy to stand as an interim chair until we find more suitable people or more people, unless there are objections to that. It's up to you guys.
In terms of participants, are you having, are there people joining calls and getting involved at this point?
There has not been much participation. Partly, I was away one of the weeks, and I think everyone's been pretty busy in the last several weeks. Well, that's what I'm hoping to ascribe it to. We certainly will put some effort into kickstarting it at KubeCon. I think that's a good place to get people together. But no, the short answer is there has not been much active participation other than my putting the charter together. Yeah, and there were some comments on the charter, but not much attendance at the meeting.
Okay, great. I think it will be a really valuable SIG, so I encourage people to get stuck in there. Thank you, Quentin.
Sure.
It's on the network.
All right. SIG network. And I got some of my updates in late, so we've got half a word in there. Good, well, a short and sweet update. We've talked about SIG network for quite some time. A charter had been drafted and open for review about 4 weeks ago. Near as I can tell, we've addressed, I think, all but maybe one comment. So the link to the Google Doc is the first hyperlink in this slide. So that's still up. People are welcome to put in comments up until hopefully we call for a formal vote maybe later today or certainly this week. Pending that formal vote, it's the intention of the SIG to meet twice a month, more or less every other Thursday. The last bit of information here that I was tardy getting in is that there's a time slot at KubeCon for sort of an intro and deep dive into the SIG. And so that's on Tuesday around 3 o'clock. So any last holdouts, I guess, for comments on the charter, now is the time.
I had one comment, and it's actually not only specific to this SIG, but I think in general, we spec'd out about 7 SIGs initially as a sort of draft to cover the full landscape. And they had, various names that have changed over time, which is understandable. But I've seen a common theme, which is that more than one of the SIGs have actually narrowed in scope. So SIG network was called SIG traffic, and it explicitly called out, much more than networking. It was all basically communication related stuff, so gRPC and many other types of system components. And it seems like, the charter still says that it covers those projects, but it seems very focused on networking, and it seems to have come out of the networking working group, which was much more narrow in scope than SIG traffic. And SIG app delivery has kind of had a similar thing, I think, in that it was originally intended to be broader than just CI/CD and delivery, but actually application development, etc. as well. And as a result, we're finding a few projects that are coming along that are saying, I can't find where I fit in because I don't seem to fit into the scope of these. So the question I have to the group and to the SIG, at least to the TOC, is, do we want to, re-broaden the scope of these SIGs to be what they were originally intended to be, or do we want to create new SIGs to fill in the gaps? Because there are clearly some gaps forming due to the narrowing of the existing SIGs.
I can't get myself off mute. Sorry. What are the examples of projects that don't fit into a SIG at the moment?
Well, so we had one recently, Cloud Events, felt like they didn't fit into SIG app delivery. And that was clearly not the intention. And in fact, serverless felt like they didn't fit into the existing SIGs. Now, that's an indication that the SIGs are either miscommunicating what their scope is, or that we, misdefined the SIG boundaries or something. That's one most recent example. And I think, there are a bunch of networking projects, or rather communication related projects, which might argue that they don't fit into the scope of what SIG network says is in scope. And so I'm sort of anticipating similar problems in the future.
My own opinion is that serverless, serverless doesn't fit naturally into one of the existing SIGs, because I think it probably warrants something like a SIG of its own. I don't know if Doug is on the call, but they've been discussing the possibility of what was it called? App platform, which would be broader than serverless. But I'm not sure that. I think that feels to me like a missing SIG rather than a gap in the existing SIG.
That one sounds like SIG runtime to me, and so that's where I was a bit confused about that proposal.
Would it make sense to try to have a discussion at KubeCon about this? Because the group of us will obviously be there, and it might be better to have a face-to-face discussion around this.
Sure, and to be clear, I didn't want to focus specifically on serverless and on SIG network. I think the observation is that several of the SIGs have narrowed their scope, and there is a perception of gaps. And in my mind, the original set of SIGs didn't have those gaps.
It's not a good thing, right? Because Kubernetes is perceived as a complex ecosystem by some people that is hard to work with, and having this fractioned SIGs and it does not help, right? So it only helps when multiple projects are worked on within the same group of people. So there is better interoperability and better, I would say, full stack that can be created from these projects in related areas, right? So maybe when SIG grows too big, it makes sense to separate this into 2 SIGs or something. But it's not a good idea to separate it, in my view, because it just doesn't entirely fit into our area of interest, right? I would separate it based on too big. You don't have enough time to cover it.
So maybe my take from app delivery perspective, I think we didn't really narrow the scope per se. I think we left the scope where it is, but we also have to see where we currently have people involved that are interested in doing certain works, and we can't have too many tracks in parallel. That's why I was always mandating for a roadmap, what to focus on first. And I think that's what we're just starting to do right now. And for example, for application definition and like the other topics, there's not a lot coming in. A lot of like the Argo work, and Argo as an example of what projects bring in was a lot around the CD front and also from the operator side, what projects came in. And where people are obviously interested in working on right now. So it's also a bit community driven and which people engage in the SIG. So I think it's a twofold situation here, but what we should definitely use KubeCon for to ensure that we connect the chairs of projects with the SIGs that they should be involved in and where they can actively participate in. I think this should resolve the issue as well.
Let's definitely keep, I think this question that Quentin brought up for that conversation, I think it's a really valid point. We're going to learn a lot as we figure out, how to navigate the serverless and app delivery SIG situation. So I think it's just something that we need to talk more about and set examples for.
And that would actually be a good example, serverless and app. That way, we're going to view it as not one or another, but in many cases, as we know, it's both serverless and containers. That makes sense. It just depends on the use case, where one is more advantageous than another. So when the SIG addresses it as a one topic, it only helps to improve that understanding and maybe even interoperability, where it's easier to move things between serverless and containers, because that would be good. I mean, even the same as Kubernetes, right? Serverless to just a regular container, non-event based. There's benefit of having it in one SIG.
Yeah, Igor, I agree with you, and that's sort of my perspective as well. The more we can get people in closely related areas talking to each other, the better. And I think we should be more inclined to doing that than to splitting them out into separate pieces whenever we get the opportunity. At least initially, the argument for lack of people to contribute is a reasonable one that Alois alluded to. But I think, in this case, we have, a group of serverless people and a group of app delivery people. So we do have the people. The question is whether to put them together in the same room to talk about it together, or separate them into different rooms to talk about them separately. And I lean towards the former. And I just wanted to bring this up as to what the rest of the people's opinion was. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to defer that conversation to KubeCon when everyone's there in face-to-face. And hopefully we can put an action item together to decide strategically which of the two directions we want to lean towards. And more importantly, which direction the TOC wants to lean towards.
All right, we've got one more quick conversation about new SIGs, but we've also kind of touched on that. And given the amount of time, I'm inclined to be able to move on towards being able to have harbor conversations. Fair? Okay, I see nods all around. So Michael, on to you.
All right, thank you, Amy. You guys hear me okay? Perfect. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present Harbor to you guys. I know there were you guys had a private email thread, and there were some concerns. I'll be happy to kind of answer them at the end. So we'll leave a little bit of time so you guys can do a little bit of Q&A. So Harbor. So we've been in the CNCF for a little bit over a year now, and we've experienced tremendous growth as part of being included in CNCF and then going through the stages from sandbox and from incubation to sandbox. And one of the biggest reasons that we want to go to a graduate stage within CF is to continue that growth that we've seen within our community. We want to get that stamp of approval from the CNCF so that our users that are putting it into production can continue to do so and have that CNCF stamp behind it as well. So in a nutshell, Harbor is an open source container image registry that secures images with role-based access control. We scan images for vulnerabilities, and then we sign images as trusted. So our big pillars are security and compliance, performance, interoperability, and providing a consistent image management for Kubernetes. In fact, our mission is to be the most secure, performance, scalable, and available cloud-native repository for Kubernetes. Next slide, please. So if you think about, why do you want to run your own registry? Amy, this is a slide where I'm going to tell you next every now and then, sorry. So as a user, you want to have security and compliance around your images. So you want to have comprehensive policy, you want to have some registry and data ownership. And as a user, you also want to have identity federation, so you can use a single set of user logins that you can use as you're interacting with your registry with some form of built-in multi-tenancy. Next slide, please. So Harbor solves that by enabling a key set of capabilities. We have vulnerability scanning using Claire, and as I'm going to talk in a few slides, we're also adding Anchor and Aqua Trivi into the mix. We have CVE exceptions. We do image signing using Notary. We allow you to enforce quotas in your project. We allow you to enforce retention policies. And then we have identity integration using OIDC and LDAP, including role-based access control and CLI secrets. And at the end, we complete the cycle of multi-tenancy using project isolation. Next slide, please. Now, if you think at the infrastructure layer, users want to deploy on any infrastructure. They want to have choice there. They want private, they want hosted, they want at the edge, they want the public cloud, they want data locality. And they want a registry that gives them Kubernetes and Docker compliance. Next slide, please. From a scale and control perspective, you want to have control access to artifacts, and you want to be able to replicate your resources based on business needs. So if you have certain assets that are geo-replicated around the globe, you might want to be able to have containers being accessible in those regions where there might not be enough compute capacity to be able to scan for vulnerabilities at the edge. Next slide, please. So what Harbor does in this case, we've added complete replication where you can replicate on demand or based on schedule your Harbor artifacts to a wide variety of targets. We support another Harbor instance. We support Docker Registry, Docker Hub, Huawei Cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP, Alibaba Cloud. So most of the public cloud providers that are popular today are a target for replication from Harbor into that region. And it's a bidirectional replication, so you can pull images from those public cloud providers or you can push images. Next slide, please. And at last, as a user, you might want automation extensibility. How can you put a registry into your environment where it can be plug and play with existing investments in infrastructure and services? Next slide. And to enable that, Harbor has support for syslog integration. We have webhooks so you can automate Harbor along with your CI/CD pipeline so you can execute different actions based on results or things that happen in Harbor. We have a fully fledged REST API as well as robot accounts to enhance automation needs. Next slide, please. This is a Harbor architecture. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but a couple of key things that I wanted to kind of note is that we have a fairly componentized architecture that can be deployed both on a Docker node using Docker Compose, or it can be deployed using a Helm chart on Kubernetes. It's fairly, the different components are fairly isolated, and we make use of a lot of other cloud native assets and tools. So we use Chart Museum from Helm charts. We use the Docker registry for our registry. We use Notary for signing. We have replicated registry providers that allow us to do the replication that I mentioned earlier, targeting the various different registry implementations. And then at the scanning layer, we have support for CentOS Claire as the built-in batteries included scanning capability, but we've also enhanced Harbor to allow users to use Aqua Trivi as well as the Anchor engine and Enterprise. So we're giving users our choice so that if they want to bring their own scanner based on their business needs or different scanning capabilities they have, they can do that. And these are out of 3 scanners that have been built in and integrated into Harbor. Next slide, please. So at the high level, Harbor started in VMware in June 2014. It was donated to CNCF last July, and then it was incubating at CNCF since November of 2018. We have 20 plus product implementations today of Harbor. These are different products that are either embedding or shipping Harbor along their distributions. We have 115 plus contributing organizations and over 300 community members that are contributing, discussing, or using Harbor. Next slide, please. This is kind of our money slide. If we look at the Harbor community and the growth that we've experienced ever since we joined CNCF, you can kind of see on the bottom right, the diagram, it's kind of both the number of contributing companies and developers has been steadily increasing since then. If you look at the Harbor activity on GitHub, it has this steady state of both contributions, comments, PRs, and today Harbor has 9.7 thousand GitHub stars, over 170 contributors, or close to 3,000 forks, 14 maintainers across 5 entities. We've had 4 minor releases since the CNCF donation, so we ship about once every 3 months, very closely to the cadence of Kubernetes at different intervals, of course. We've had 30,000 downloads, 700 Slack members, 12,000 Slack messages, over 1,200 Twitter followers, close to a little bit over 8,000 commits, 6 blogs, 3 webinars that were published by our close-knit community, but also a wide variety of other articles and PR mentions outside of that. 4,500 PRs, 95 contributing companies that are like actively contributing, 71,000 GitHub views, and 13,000 GitHub unique visitors. So that kind of gives you an idea of the Harbor community. It's fairly vibrant. And I know we're going to discuss a little bit about our maintainer diversity later on, but the community is very strong. We have every day that we interact on Harbor, we find a new user that has Harbor in production and is using it at a very large scale that we didn't know about because it just works. They're using it and they're very happy with it, and they don't come back to us for any questions or concerns. Next slide, please. So one of the new features that we're adding in Harbor 1.10 that will have a release candidate at KubeCon in a couple of weeks is this concept of an interrogation service. We're essentially extending Harbor to include pluggable scanners so that both users, companies, or other partners can come and implement their own scanning capability on top of Harbor. Today, that scanning is really concentrating on checking for CVEs and doing static vulnerability analysis. But the API and the pluggable architecture is going to expand so that it could include a lot more. So what if someone came up with a scanner that does license checking for a specific enterprise? Or you added your own scanning that validates certain CMDB artifacts that are being deployed within your organization. So we want to give customers as well as our users the choice of implementing their own scanners if they want to, based on our spec, that can do specific things in their environment. And initially we started this process with Aqua and Anchor, and they were the first 2 out of 3 scanners. And last week we learned that DoSec, which is a security company in China, took our API from the documentation, didn't even talk to us, and they implemented their own scanning solution for their environment. They did it completely on their own based on the docs, and they started using it for their users. Next slide, please. So, you know, Harbor has had a healthy number of releases in the last year, but we're not done. As part of being good stewards of the community, we have a fairly well documented roadmap that talks about some of the investments that we want to do both in near term as well as long term. We use GitHub projects to kind of track our different releases in terms of swim lanes. And when we look at our roadmap, we basically separate it into 3 different swim lanes. Management, where we want to build Kubernetes operators, we want to do signing policy replication, observability enhancements around image distribution. So we want to implement proxy cache capabilities as well as P2P distribution on top of Uber's Kraken, as well as Dragonfly by Alibaba that you guys mentioned earlier today. And then on the extensibility front, we already have webhooks, but we want to enhance them. We want to keep adding more things around automation and enabling users to plug and play Harbor with existing solutions and services. We want to enhance the interrogation service that we just mentioned on the previous slide. And then last, we want to be good stewards of the community and get plugged into the OCI registry and OCI conformance so that Harbor can have support for additional artifacts beyond container images and Helm charts. Next slide, please. So I want to basically turn the mic here to Nathan Lowe from Highland Software to give us a couple of minutes overview of what they're doing with Harbor.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everybody. I am Nathan Lowe, and I'm a platform engineer at Highland Software, a leader in the content services platform space. My team has pioneered the use of containers at Highland over the last few years. We've made heavy use of Harbor and have been using it in our day-to-day development cycle since version 1.2. Our instance currently stores approximately 2,400 unique tags across 670 different images and 175 projects. These containers consume approximately 2.7 terabytes of data. Harbor has been instrumental in enabling my team to prove the value of containers to the organization, and it's paved the way for us to build our first set of SaaS applications from the ground up on a brand new cloud-native platform. Our primary use case for Harbor is focused in the research and development arm of the company, and our instance stores a wide variety of images ranging from the different tools used in continuous integration pipelines to fully fledged applications from a variety of stages in the build lifecycle, including pre-release images like beta releases or storing builds from pull requests. Additionally, my team uses or for many teams rather, that use a separate system for managing their deployments, these teams make use of Harbor for storing their Helm charts as well. And we will most likely see more of our developers adopting this feature in the future as we onboard more developers and applications into our SaaS platform. The Harbor team has been very receptive to feedback this whole time, and a very good example of this is a tool that we developed and later open source to automate the cleanup of old tags. This tool became the basis for the tag retention policies feature that was recently released in Harbor 1.9, and I actually ended up joining the Harbor project as a maintainer to help with the design and the initial development of this feature. We're looking forward to utilizing some of the newer features as well, including the robot accounts that Michael mentioned, instead of using Active Directory service accounts to push and pull images from our automated pipelines. We see Harbor continuing to play a very important role in our development lifecycle for the foreseeable future, and we're excited to see how it continues to evolve to support new use cases as well as improving the experience of existing ones. So thanks for your time, and now I'll hand it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Nathan. So next slide, please, Amy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about another customer as well of ours, VPay, which is a leading payment solutions provider. They couldn't make it on the call, but one of the important things I wanted to show here on their architecture is that they have 2 instances of Harbor in 2 different data centers where they have an active Kubernetes environment in each one of these data centers, and they're using Harbor to replicate their resources. It's about 100 gigabytes that they're replicating from one node to the other, to ensure that they have high availability of their images, and any of their compute units and the container images that they're running there can have access to a registry if it needs to pull down an image and execute or stand up a new application. And actually, one of the other things I wanted to mention, one of our biggest users is Didi, which is a ride-sharing service in China, and they have an environment with 20+ terabytes of storage on Harbor. And today, we learned that MuleSoft is actually using Harbor in production with about 5.5 terabytes of storage, 1,000+ unique images. And they told us that they have 17 million pool operations on Harbor so far. 17 million. So, you know, we're constantly, every day, we're learning about a new customer that has Harbor in production, and they're happily using it. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the Harbor graduation criteria. So we filed the PR. We have the due diligence technical document that includes a wide variety of statistics and a lot of the 2.1 criteria that were required by the TOC. We have more than 25 customers are using Harbor in production or some various stages of production in the adopters file. We have customer testimonials, and Harbor today has a few enterprise distributions with support agreements behind it, mainly by VMware, Enterprise PKS, Essential PKS, and vSphere integrated containers. Like to believe we have a healthy number of committers, although our maintainer diversity is not high. We do have 5 external maintainers that are on the project with 104 active contributors, 346 authors of pull requests, and 171 committers today. And like I mentioned earlier, we have a new release every 3 months with over 1,800 PRs merged just in the last year. I want to open it up for questions right now. I know you guys had some concerns, so I want to take the opportunity to give you guys time to ask those.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. This is Alexis. Can you hear me?
Yes, Alexis. Thank you.
Hi. Can we go back to the stats that you showed?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. This one here, yeah. How are you measuring your downloads?
The downloads were measured basically, so we use Google storage, and we use the Google API to basically see downloads of the Harbor binaries. And then we also have some of them on Docker Hub as well.
Okay.
Docker Hub is a little bit weird because we also use it for our CI/CD, and that has like over 1 million downloads, so we can't really use that number. So we're going based on our storage APIs as well as Docker Hub.
Because 30,000 is not a very large number of downloads in a period of time. And I noticed also that you've only had 4 releases since the CNCF donation. So,
That's
I mean...
4 minor releases. So just
right.
like Kubernetes has 1.14, 1.15, 1.16, so...
I mean, you know, I'm going to be devil's advocate, and I'm going to express modest and respectful concern for the longevity of this project. What can you do? By the way, I think the user testimonials were great. That definitely helped a lot, and I think it's important to see that there is a use case for an open source registry of this type that is not one of the hosted ones, et cetera, et cetera. So that's fabulous. Can you help us to understand, you know, what's going to make sure that A, your organization continues to drive this, because it looks like you're a major driver in it, and B, what happens if, you know, things change and your organization ceases to drive it? How do we know that MuleSoft and VPay and the car sharing thing in China and the folks who did the testimonial just now are all going to be happy after that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a super valid concern. I mean, I was expecting that. VMware has been a steward and huge contributor to Harbor since 2014, and we've actually shown no signs that we were ever going to pull out of the project. And actually, in fact, we've been increasing our investment into Harbor every 6 months or so. We've added more contributors. We've added more folks that are doing community relationships, program management, product management. We've shown no signs behind that. However, because this is a concern, we have 4 or 5 external maintainers that are also started to get expertise in different areas of the project. So for example, Daniel from Agua is becoming our security expert. So he's in charge of a lot of the pluggable adapters, and he's basically stewarding that area. We have NetEase that has taken ownership around webhooks. We have Kihu that has taken ownership around the replication providers to all of the different public cloud providers. So we're starting to delegate some of this responsibility to folks outside VMware so they can take the leadership position there and start helping us both enhance their knowledge in those areas. And should ever something happen to VMware, even though there's no indication that that will happen, the project could be in a good shape.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm not actually, I'm not suggesting I'm worried about something happening to VMware. I'm more worried about something happening to the project. And I've been at VMware when things have gotten shut down. It does happen now and then, unfortunately, even things that look pretty strong. So it's great to hear that you have a plan that you're executing on for bringing people up through the ladder from initial contributions up to maintainership. It would be good probably to see more about that and to understand on what time frame you want there to be, let's say, I don't know, 2 core maintainers who are able to do a release, who are not necessarily in your organization. I think that would, for me, be a sign that the community has confidence in the project long term. Or alternatively, that there is some express commitment from VMware demonstrating that at least for sort of some period of time, the company is committed, to give you time to continue to grow the community.
Yeah, we can definitely give you that commitment from VMware. And I can answer a couple of the other items as well. One of the other things I wanted to mention earlier is that, when the security penetration testing company Q53 went over our code, they were impressed at the level of code, both from a documentation standpoint, the segmentation of the code, the services architecture. It was very easy for them to follow. So that's one of the things that we've always invested in, so that the seeds are there for the project to continue no matter what happens. Then the core maintainers, I wanted to bring one more thing around that. They don't have any more power than a regular maintainer. It's just we basically gave an elevated title to some of the more leaders of the project. Anyone can do a release of Harbor today. Everything is well documented, our CI engine and everything, and they should be able to do that. So kind of just some additional color there. And we're not necessarily trying to get the project. We're super open to having more contributions from external folks to come in. And our goal is to continuously adding more maintainers that are actively involved in the project, and they have an interest and a commitment to continuously help us improve. So that's been our goal.
Got it.
That's how.
So I'm not personally in any way trying to advocate that you should not gate the project. That is one strategy that leads you down a certain path and will lead to one set of questions. It sounds like you're choosing a strategy where you want to have a very open, ungated governance and expand the maintainership and the governance fairly quickly. Is that a correct understanding?
I don't know if I would say quickly. I want to expand it. A healthy project includes maintainers from many companies, and as we're making more and more investments into Harbor, we can accelerate those investments and accelerate the delivery of those features if we have more folks contributing to it. So
okay. So what is your governance model right now?
So our governance model right now is actually super flexible for new folks to come in. Any company that has a maintainer in Harbor only gets 1 vote. So VMware, with the majority of the maintainers, only has 1 vote in governance. So Nate from Highland Software has as much voting power in Harbor as I do as the core maintainer from VMware.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it would be great if you could tell us, in that case, how you think over the next 6 to 12 months CNCF could help to make sure that process proceeds not too fast, but at the speed that you want it to. And at that point, I don't have any other questions for now. I want to know if anyone else from the TOC wants to ask a question.
I do. Hey, great presentation, Michael. This is Michelle, and I was just looking over the contributing document, and this is one of the cleanest contributing documents I've ever seen, by the way. But I wanted to know, how do you make design decisions? The core maintainers of the project have that elevated status because they've been leaders in the project. Are they the ones who approve design decisions, or does the entirety of the maintainer group vote? How does that work?
Usually we all get together once every 3 months based on our release cadence, and we discuss the investments that we want to make. And so far, we've never had anybody disagree. So everybody's in agreement with the investments that we want to make so far. And the decisions are pretty much have been made unanimously. We never had to actually put it to a vote, which is a sign of a healthy community. But if we had to make a vote, then we'll follow the governance, which basically every company that is a member of the Harbor Maintainer Group gets one vote. But so far, unilateral, we all agree on the investments, and then we divvy up the work based on availability and different commitments that folks have, and then we start working on them.
Okay.
And different of our maintainers have brought different concerns. For example, NetEase, who took the leadership on webhooks, were very interested in that and took the lead on that. Nate from Highland was a big proponent of the tag retention. So he kind of pushed that, and we got folks to work on it and created a working group to enable that, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And then how does a maintainer become a core maintainer?
We put it to vote. Essentially, it requires a long history of contributions into Harbor, a dedication to continuing to advocate for Harbor, and then usually it's just a period of time. So as some of our maintainers have had a significant amount of time on Harbor right now, we'll start promoting them as well.
Okay, and who votes?
The entire maintainership, so everybody.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael. I think we're out of time, and I'm sure we will have more questions, but maybe we can follow up emails and so on afterwards.
Yeah, let me know. I'll be happy to answer any more emails, or to jump on another call. I'll do that.
All right, thank you so much. Good to see everyone. Note that we will not be having a community presentation meeting, and we'll see you all in San Diego. Chris, anything from you?
Yep. Take care, all.
All right, good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. All.
Bye.